Hello, everyone. Good morning. Nice to see you all logged on. I am, of course, Sam Camarena. I'm the manager of the CSU Advancement Academy, and I'm also the person that's been in charge of coordinating system-wide reporting of philanthropic gains and expenditures here at the Chancellor's Office to help prepare some of the usual reports that we produce to benchmark our philanthropic productivity. Today's event is called the webinar because I'll be doing a lot of talking to the group, but please do not be shy to ask questions throughout today's meeting. You can electronically raise your hand as I present to ask a question, and as soon as I finish a thought, I'll turn to everybody with a raised hand to get their thoughts. Also, we will have opportunities to have a few minutes of Q&A after each section of today's webinar. There'll be 4 sections, so 4 opportunities for Q&A as well. And the insight I'll be sharing is mostly to give guidance on what to report on which tool. Your colleagues here on the meeting are going to be your best resource for campus procedures and processes to best track this information. And prepare the reports when it comes time to do so. So please connect with each other in the chat for sidebar conversations. They're not just allowed, they're kind of encouraged. And you'll also have an opportunity for a little bit of facilitated discussion to exchange some of those processes during the Q&A sessions. And this meeting is being recorded, and the video will be shared with registrants in a few days in case you want to revisit any of the topics covered today or pass it along to a colleague. It'll be available then as well as a resource. And now we'll get started with a little bit of housekeeping before we dive into the main portion of today's content. Those of you that have been on a webinar with me recently know where I'm going, and I'm going to ask everybody to go ahead and rename themselves on Zoom to add their campus name. And you'll do that by first opening up your participants window. It's a good idea to keep this window open throughout today's meeting. And then you want to find your name on there. It's going to be towards the top. You want to hover your cursor over it. Be sure to, when you do so, you'll get the option to rename. So you'll want to go ahead and click that button. And then you'll have an opportunity to change your display name as in the field right there. I ask that everybody please add their first and last name and their campus. Try to include the city name or maybe the part that comes after the CSU part in there as well to help us keep track of where everybody's joining us from. And I'll give everybody just a couple seconds here now so they can have an opportunity to do so. Alrighty, nice to see lots of familiar faces and people joining us from all over the system. A little bit of tips for how we will run Q&A and engagement. Everybody's been muted on entry. You have the ability to unmute yourself, but I ask that you kindly stay on mute if you're not actively speaking. This is just to cut down on any unexpected background noise, a loud truck passing by, somebody walking into the room, and this way we can all hear each other. And if you have a question or thought to share as I'm kind of working through some slides, please electronically raise your hand. I'll show everybody how to do so in a minute, and then I'll go ahead and call on you when we have a good moment to pause and we can raise that question to the group here. And again, there'll be Q&A periods after each sections of the webinar. We'll be able to come in on audio, ask a question live, or drop them in the chat for me to go over as well. And again, please do not be shy to ask questions. This is for your benefit and to clarify some of these lingering kind of curiosities that we have. So please, this is the time to ask. And of course, you're welcome to use the chat to engage with other attendees, track resources that you feel might be helpful if we get to that point as well. And everybody's able to save the chat transcript in case that there's something in there you want to revisit later. To electronically raise your hand, on the newer versions of Zoom, you'll have a reactions button in your main Zoom window. You'll want to click that guy first, and then you'll have a button to raise your hand, and that's going to shoot up your name to the top of the participants list, which I have open as well. And that lets me know that somebody has a question for me. And if you're on a slightly older version of Zoom, which I think might just be the tiny few of you, your raise hand button will be a blue hand on the bottom left-hand corner of your participants window. Again, another good reason to keep that window open throughout today's meeting. Looking now at the agenda, like I said, we're going to have 4 main parts where we'll go over one, changes and kind of an overview of the CASE global reporting standards. And then we'll go over some high-level survey of the VSC survey itself tool. And then there's some specific questions that came in through the previously collected questions from the group that I'll address as well. And then we will also do a survey overview of the summary sheet, the purpose for that form, and some of the main sections. And then we'll also do a very short survey of the CSU advancement expenditure reporting, why we do that reporting, and what are some of the products that come out of it altogether. So we're in for a couple good topics today. And so now turning to our global reporting standards. And I'll start the conversation by saying that CASE is a global organization. They have members and units and arms of the organization throughout the world. So they're really looking to have their survey tools like the VSC, the Alumni Engagement Metrics Survey, their campaign survey, and some of the other regional surveys that they use to capture philanthropic productivity begin to speak kind of the same language and keep some consistency and also speak to some of the trends that are available there globally. So that's why CASE embarked on the fun project of developing these global reporting standards to provide a common set of definitions for advancement professionals across the globe. Before these global reporting standards, there were other reporting standards, which we're all familiar with, that other blue book that CASE had, and those were heavily based on US tax law, which the rest of the world kind of shrugged their shoulders at and was like, well, what does it have to be based on the US tax law? And there was no good reason for it. So CASE embarked on defining some of these items at a global level in a way that they are kind of sensitive to the nuances and cultural differences of different regions in the world and of the CASE constituency. And the result was the CASE reporting standards that still get at some of those nuances, but also help track essentially support of education. And a good way to kind of look at the CASE global standards is that they're that bottom light gray disc that cuts across all their various tools. So you'll see it cutting across their alumni engagement metric survey, their regional surveys like the VSE or the CASE Ross survey that they use in the UK, and their campaign survey as well. This is kind of the end goal of where CASE is trying to get to this. We're not quite there yet. We'll see a little bit of this kind of coming together in next year's CASE survey 2022, where we'll see, for instance, the way that we count alumni is going to be pretty much the same as the way we count alumni in their alumni engagement metrics survey. So this is essentially the end goal of developing these common set of standards for the way we report on their tools. And again, before this, the guidance was heavily based on US law. And I'll underscore too that these standards are not meant to set strategy, rather they're CASE is looking to use these to develop some very scientific ways to measure philanthropic productivity across their constituency, which is the world. And one way that really cuts across regions and cultures and practices is essentially looking at the money that comes in through the door each year to institutions. So that's a lot of why the CASE survey is very heavy on a cash basis. And we'll dive a little bit more into that in just a second, but I'll tease that one right now. Before we go into a little bit more of what's changed with the CASE reporting standards, I want to clarify a few points that I've been getting kind of as questions. One of them being that the guidance, the standards part is only for what's reported on the CASE and AM Atlas surveys. AM Atlas is the kind of benchmarking metrics arm of CASE. And again, it only applies to what they're asking you to report on that survey. CASE has really no authority to tell you what to record in your own campus systems. I've had a few gift officers kind of conflate some of those where they're bringing up discussions of booking when it comes to some of these new guidance. That's not going to be the case. It's going to be, you're still booking everything as you would, but the the data that being asked to be queried out of that database to go onto the surveys is now a little bit different, and we'll go over some of that as well. And also, these standards have no effect on campaign counting guidelines, which are set at the institution, really for that institution's needs against some strategic goals and priorities that they have there as well. So essentially, CASE can't um, set that standard as well. They have some kind of industry best practices that they suggest to campuses that are entering campaign, but just like all suggestions and guidelines, you can take them as is appropriate to the venture that you're embarking on with your campaign. And I'll stop right here because I anticipate that there may be some questions. So I want to give it just a few minutes to see if anybody wants to raise a hand or jump off of mute in terms of any of the bullet points that I've raised thus far. And of course, feel free to drop a question in the chat for me as well. All right. So we'll move on, but again, there'll be opportunity for questions later as well. So there's generally two lenses of tracking fundraising. There's funds received. This is really the assets, the money that came into the bank in a particular period of time. And then there are funds committed, which are funds promised or committed at different levels of intensity to the institution, in this case, our university, within a period as well. Among fundraisers as a whole, the funds committed is the optimal measure because it is really we're able to see our productivity, both with the funds kind of immediately that came in and funds that are on the way that were kind of captured and committed in a particular time period. And we use this funds committed method quite heavily in the CSU as well. We call them gift commitments, and they're kind of our standard of measuring productivity. However, when we look at kind of the globe, even across the country, even across the state of California, from institution to institution, there's a lot of variance and nuance in the way that institutions track committed funds because they're not all committed in the same way. Again, some are a little bit more firmer than others. And then those terms vary across those institutions as well, depending on individual pledge policies that the university might have. And then definitely across the globe, where there's kind of cultural differences that could also influence that as well. It might be quite common, for instance, in some parts of the world where you can book a $1 million gift based on a handshake between the donor and the gift officer. That, of course, will make our skin crawl because we definitely want to get a gift agreement to document that. But there are, again, kind of cultural differences in the way of what's considered a committed gift. And so given all that variety, the case really wanted to, being kind of scientifically oriented as they are, they really wanted to track something that was hard and neat. So they're really focusing on the funds received for their surveys. And that's been the case for quite a while now. And that's why we have the VSC so heavily focused on a cash asset received basis. The focus on, and then that focus by case also necessitates the way that the CSU adds that supplemental summary sheet, which captures our fund committed. And then we'll dive into that a little bit further as well. But between the very strong VSC that captures our funds received, and then our supplement that captures our funds committed, we have a very accurate picture each year of the philanthropic productivity of the CSU. With these new global case standards, CASE is beginning to kind of venture a little bit more into codifying and setting parameters into the funds committed section of the framework. One example is the age minimum for revocable deferred gifts, and I'll share plenty on that in just a minute. And also in 2022, we'll be able to use the request that gets reported on section 1 that will now become a more firm part of the survey in terms of being added to the total. That's not the case quite this year as well, but again, the case is slowly venturing into setting some parameters for these gift commitments, gift committed lens of philanthropy kind of on a global basis as well. So on to some of the important changes from the new case standards. One of them is that preferential seating for arts and athletics can be included in the amount access to qualifiable tangible donor benefits received. So what that means is that case kind of decided that the preferential seating just doesn't have a value anymore in terms of their counting. So instead, you'll want to look at any of those booster packages or other items in a way that have tangible benefits. To the IRS, still as of 2018, if there is some preferential seating privileges in as a benefit of a gift, that gift is not tax deductible. So you'll want to make sure that donors don't get a tax acknowledgement letter for that. But for case reporting, they don't necessarily, it's always been hard to kind of track that value of the preferential seating. So they just made it a moot point by saying there's just no value to it. Look at everything else in terms of deducting benefits received by donors. The guidance, the standards also give clear guidance on governmental grants and that they're not countable, no matter the level of government. Even tribal sovereign nations are not counted in any reporting to the VSE. This is not really new guidance, but it's kind of underscored again to make sure that that's very clearly communicated to respondents of the VSE surveys. And then this guidance applies to really to both CASE and CSU. The one exception is on the CSU side, we do allow counting of gifts from Native American and tribal entities, but I'll show everybody where we would go ahead and record that on our summary sheet. But for the meantime, you definitely want to keep in the mindset on VSE, no public funds. It's all going to be all privately sourced dollars received that are going to be reported on the VSE. And so the trick again remains with grants, because I got a question about this pre-submitted. You're really looking for grants that are coming from private entities. I'd be very suspicious of the word foundation. That gets used quite liberally by the nonprofit space. And there are also some foundations at the federal government level too that are actually private money that are actually public money that you don't want to count. So you want to keep a close eye that you're only using reporting grants from private sources. And then it's also important to keep track that the grants, particularly for research, that there is no caveat that the funder gets to retain intellectual property of the research that comes out of it, because that disqualifies it as a gift and as something that's countable. So you want to make sure that it's from private source and it's something that the end product gets to be retained in intellectual property by the university or the faculty. And really kind of keeping track of all these grants requires a pretty healthy partnership with your research office, occasional check-ins, and just kind of communicating to them that it's important for both teams to keep track of these private grants that come into the university, and really just keeping a good relationship with auxiliaries across the campus that accept these any private grants, so that you can keep them again kind of in your larger database in advancement, and just kind of keep your gift officers in advance just up to speed in terms of the private funding that comes into the university as well. So a direct message question about the preferential seating. So we're not looking, so it would be the amount of the gifts minus anything that has nothing to do, any benefit that has nothing to do with preferential seating. So
maybe I can help, Sam.
Thank you.
So essentially you can look at what was gifted to the university minus any tangible benefits. So the cost of attending the event, if they received benefits to attend special tailgates or receptions, or if they got special swag for being boosters. What this does is says that there's no intrinsic value in the ability to either purchase tickets early or purchase tickets in a particular section, that doesn't have a value that you need to deduct from the gift, but that other tangible benefits do need to be deducted.
Awesome. Thank you, Laurie. And yeah, if anybody has questions on that one, we have a good section coming up of Q&A where we can further clarify if needed. So starting with 2022, conditional pledges can be counted as pledges on the VSE. For many, many years now, I've advised campuses that you can count your conditional pledges on our summary sheet for the CSU, but not on the VSE. Starting with 2022, you can count them on both. But this year, just be careful that you're still just putting them on the summary sheet. You're not including them on the VSE. And on both tools, you want to keep a very close eye that you're just reporting the pledge value in a 5-year window. So if it's a 7-year pledge, you're going to include the value up to 5 years. And then once those 5 years have come, then you'll report the following 2 years in terms of on the VSE and on the summary sheets. Yeah, so that 5-year is key. The case also issued some guidance advising that donor advised funds are only counted when they're kind of put to use by the institution. I don't think there's any CSU that currently is hosting a DAF, but just in case there's that changes in the next year, you're not going to be able to count the funds if they just are parked in the DAF. They have to be distributed to some use in the university. And at that point, you can count that as productivity or funds received by the university. And then, of course, there's the guidance on accounting of bequest and legacy intentions. So revocable deferred gifts, when donors, you can only count those starting with 2020, count those from donors who are of age 65 or older as by the end of the reporting year, or by the end of the campaign for the case campaign survey. And again, that's just for revocable deferred gifts. Irrevocable deferred gifts can be counted pretty much at any age on a different part of the VSE. The VSE sets some pretty standard, pretty strict rules on, I think there's maybe 4 vehicles on there that they consider a irrevocable gift. Everything else is going to end up in section 1 of the VSE as a bequest intention. And then again, if you're completing the campaign survey, you again report those in 5-year increments as well. And then I'll clarify too that all deferred gifts, both revocable and irrevocable, will be reported at both face and present value throughout the case survey and on the CSU summary sheet as well. That was face value might be the more defaulted form of valuing these for campaign standards, but when it comes to system-wide reporting and case reporting, you want both the face and the present value. On some of the irrevocable giving instruments, the present value is the tax deductible amount to the donor. So there's gift planning software that can help you calculate that amount. And of course, my team is available to help kind of give you the tools and point you in the right direction if you need any help calculating that as well. Let's see here. Go. And again, I mentioned this earlier about the intellectual property, but it bears reminding that it is really only a philanthropic gift if, again, the university gets to keep kind of ownership of the product that comes out of it. Otherwise, it is, it's considered an exchange transaction where they lend a piece of software or a tool, or they funded a project, but the funder ultimately tries to retain some ownership of the intellectual property, and that's not really considered a gift. It could be a strategic move by your research department to help advance a program or something, and it's nothing wrong with that particular type of arrangement. We just have to be careful not to count those in our philanthropic productivity. Gifts of software are still excluded from case and CSU reporting altogether. There is, even this year, there's an optional field that has, you can provide the value of gifts of software, and that's just a completely optional, not added to any total of the VSE, that you're able to report that if you have that available. But again, not really countable to cases overall totals or to the CSU totals as well. And those are essentially the the really big changes from the reporting standards. But you don't have to take my word for it. You, of course, can buy your own copy. They're available via a printed copy or an electronic copy that you can access through the case website that I find particularly helpful because you can search it very quickly. There's at the beginning of these standards, there are some policies that case outlined in terms of ethics, in terms of donor bills of rights, and some of the work that went into putting together these global standards. Section 2 has kind of the global standards as they are based on some of the larger global definitions for these items. And then section 3 and beyond, there's country specific appendices that that take the standard guidance and kind of bring into light some of the more nuanced legal environments of member countries in cases network. Notably, some of these sections are even in other languages. The Mexico section is in Spanish. The Canada section is in both English and French. So there's, if you're ever curious, you can take a peek and see what some of the guidance is over there. But again, we just have some of the luck of the US appendices heavily referencing the larger case global standards and definitions. So you'll want to just kind of check out definitely the beginning part of that as well, and just keep it handy for when you get these questions as they arise in the next couple of months as we prepare to complete the 2022 VSE survey. And because we are very good respondents to the VSE survey and we're generally pretty cozy with case, they gave us a bit of a scoop on what we can expect for the 2022 VSE. One of them being that there'll be a distinct field for gifts coming from donor advised funds. We're used to seeing kind of the usual buckets of alumni, parents, other fundraising consortia, other organizations. And now there's going to be another one that's just DAFs, distinct again from fundraising consortia and other organizations that might have previously held donor advised funds. There will be a change in the terminology of alumni of record to contactable alumni, with some additional guidance saying that you'll need to omit records that are tagged as do not contact in your database, or the alum has expressed some wish to not be contacted. And then the alumni categories will also be very similar to the AEM surveys. With this year's VSE, you'll see that there's still undergraduate, graduate, degree holders, but starting with 2022, you'll have kind of certificates, associates, baccalaureate, graduate degrees, etc., to further kind of bifurcate the type of degrees type of degrees that the alumni hold.
And what might be new, Sam, is multiple degree holder. So they might have an undergraduate and graduate degree, or an undergraduate and certificate degree. It has been found that a multiple degree holder from your institution has a higher propensity to give.
Awesome. Thank you, Lori. Further additions to the 2022 survey, there'll be an optional field that recognizes soft credits to individuals. Right now, there's just an optional field that does a breakdown of these soft credits to constituents that sit on governing boards, but it sounds like that's going to be expanded as well. There's also going to be an optional field that breaks down giving by bands or ranges. The CSU is not going to require this data, but it is probably a very interesting piece of information that campuses can use to compare with each other, and really interesting to compare kind of nationally wide as well through the VSE data miner tool. So you guys want to keep an eye out for that one. And with that, we are at our first Q&A session. So based on all the previous slides in terms of the case reporting, global reporting standards, are there any questions from the group? And of course, you guys are welcome to raise your hand or come off mute and pose any burning questions you may have. So, and then I already have one here. So contactable as it is now on the case surveys is if you have at least one method of one method of contacting the alum that you believe is to be accurate. Most oftentimes this is going to be an email address that you think is valid. So if you have one of those pieces of information, then that they're considered quote unquote contactable.
Well, they're considered an alum of record right
Of
now.
record.
So contactable is really being more discreet about not only do you have contact information, but a means of reaching them, but that they're allowing you to do so. So particularly with GDPR in the European Union, many more alumni are now tagging themselves as do not contact. And obviously when they're do not contact, you can't fundraise. So, so that's why the distinction was made.
And thank you for catching that, Lori. I fumbled the words there. Awesome. All right, holding to see if anybody else has any questions for case global reporting standards. And you're welcome to jump off mute and ask them or type them in the chat. Alrighty, well, we'll move on, but again, happy to address any as you may think them up.
So one other area that you'll be able to count that I would mention is alumni membership fees. You'll be able to count those again, net of any benefits that the individual would receive. So sometimes it's more difficult to figure out what the value of the benefits is and easier just not to count those funds, but it is at least permitted now to count those funds.
Awesome. And that's with the 2022 VSC. On the current one that's open right now, anything that is tied to an alumni association fee is not permissible to count. Awesome. Alrighty. Well, moving on now to the VSC itself, and I'll kind of give a little bit of insight in that it's probably one of the more oldest and comprehensive surveys on private philanthropic support to education in the nation. I don't think there's anything that comes close to rivaling it. It has 4 main sections, and each of those sections have several subsections, and we're looking at 11 pages kind of all together. In 2021, again, it is largely based on funds received. It hasn't quite made the foray into playing with funds committed just yet. And there's still strict rules on irrevocable deferred gifts. Like I mentioned, there's only, I think, 4 vehicles in section 3 they consider irrevocable. Even if, you know, it's ultimately a request that is made irrevocable with a gift agreement, it's not technically considered irrevocable based on cases standards. But I'll have a slide on that later as well. And there is an unoptional section, and I do optional in air quotes because it's not optional to the CSU, section 1 that captures pledges and some of these testamentary commitments. And it's optional because it isn't added to the total for the VSC survey as part of some of the other main sections. But it's, again, very important data, and we ask CSU respondents to complete that section as well. Right. So this is the familiar kind of outline of the VSC. This is from the 2021 survey. And you'll see here again, there's a lot of items that are marked as optional, but really the only optional section that we have in the CSU is going to be section 2B, advancement expenditures. And it's optional because the CSU has developed much more its own methodology for capturing these expenditures that is more robust, and it predates really the way that CASE is doing it, and it's more appropriate to the CSU operations. Sections beginning with a 3 are really the main parts of the survey, where there's matrices on there where you can break out giving by the source and the purposes. And it's important to note that, again, these are all funds received that you'll be reporting on sections 3, pretty much. Yeah, sections 3 throughout the survey, except for section 1, are all funds received. And that's, of course, new gifts, pledge payments, and irrevocable deferred gifts. And then again, I probably teased it a couple times now, but the deferred, oops, the deferred giving section, you'll have it right there. They consider charitable remainder trusts, charitable gift annuities, pooled income funds, remainder interest in property as the 4 vehicles of irrevocable gifts. And those are the ones that you'll be able to report in a matrix on that page based on whether they're coming from alumni, parents, or other. Sorry. And again, I'll underscore the point here that you'll want to make sure that it's only these 4 vehicles, even if it's a like a bequest or something else that's made irrevocable with a gift agreement. If you get one of those gifts, it's going to end up in section 1 and not on here because it's not the vehicles that it mentions. And while gifts from trusts are technically organizations, and they're technically coming from an organization. Case is really set up in a way where they're more interested in the person who set up the trust, and setting up the buckets by alumni, parents, and others in that respect as well. And that's also in line with non-trust related gift instruments like gift annuities that also are by the individual basis. So that was a pre-submitted question on kind of understanding whether a trust is an organization or a person. A trust is technically an organization set up by an individual to help administer some funds. But for section 3C of the VSC, we're really interested in the individual that set up those trusts. Moving, and then again, section 1, which I teased, and this is really where you'll end up putting those testamentary gifts that I mentioned that are not going to be able to be included in section 3C. Section 1 is also where you are able to report outstanding pledges, and you can see the matrix there. You'll do a count of the pledges, the total pledge amount, net of any pledge payments by the end of the year. So if it was like a $1 million pledge, and there was $500,000 paid within the reporting year, and there's 500,000 outstanding, you'll do a 1 in the count and then 500,000 in the amount. And then again, you'll want to clarify whether it's for current operations or for capital purposes. And again, those are definitions that are provided by the VSC and case. You'll be able to kind of click a help document at the beginning of the survey to get those definitions as well. And then again, in 2021, we're not counting conditional pledges just yet. You'll have to wait till next year to add those to the VSC. And then, and again, the number of testamentary commitments and the number of provisions are the individual gifts themselves, and then there was a question pre-submitted earlier that was asking whether this is tied to the source of the funds or the commitments. And it's really, it's if there's a commitment kind of in 2 paragraphs on one estate, that's one estate document, that's one commitment. And if there's kind of additional commitments from related trusts, that's another 2 additional commitments. So you'll put kind of a 3 right there from each of those, and then you'll just add up the face and the present value of those as well. And I see there's a question in the chat here for me. And we got a question here in the chat regarding kind of Blackbaud's available capability to prepare some of these new reports for the VSC. I know that they're in very close contact with a case in the VSC, and they're staying on top of these records. And that's also a good topic that we also take up on our user groups that we have with Razor's Edge, in terms of both working with Blackbaud and colleagues to develop some of these processes and kind of tips and ways to better query our CRMs to fill out the VSC report. So to address the question, where everybody's looking at it very closely, and I think we'll have some kind of tangible solutions in the coming months as well. Moving on to section 4A, this is, and this is something I'm touching on because there was a specific question for it that was received in advance of today's webinar. And I'll begin by trying to define what a governing board is. So essentially the governing board is a body that's in charge with fiduciary and governing powers of a particular nonprofit. Understandably, there's a lot of auxiliaries on campuses. They each will probably have their own governing board. So you'll want to take note of those as well. And you'll want to see some giveaways of whether it's a governing board or not is if it's tied to a 501c3, if there's a 990 that lists some of the governing members on there as well, then you know that that's a governing board. But we have to be careful too not to conflate these with advisory boards, of which there are a multitude on campuses, which are, could be several to each college. And these are just folks that sit on advisory boards are kind of proponents of a particular program or a particular area, and they're able to kind of help it out, but they don't have the authority to tell the staff what to do. That's just what governing boards are. So you want to keep an eye out for members of governing boards in auxiliaries throughout your campus. You also want to keep an eye out for any board of trustees, any trustee members that might be given to your campus as well, because the CSU Board of Trustee also counts as a governing board for the university. And there's just a handful of our trustees that give directly to campuses, but you're welcome to cross-reference that with the list of our trustees on our website as well. Also, when it comes to the item of soft credit, there might be some nuances in your CRMs where by default, there is both a hard and a soft credit assigned to every record. Soft credits, when it comes to the VSC, that we're really being specific to the linkage between two records that helps identify somebody directing a gift through, like, for instance, the donor advised fund or the corporation. And if it wasn't for that linkage, you wouldn't know that other entity or that other person was related to the gift that got legal credit. So you want to ask yourself the question of, without this particular soft credit, am I going to know that there was an additional donor kind of involved? And again, that's going to be a little bit nuanced based on the way that your CRM and your database is set up. But you want to focus on, again, that important linkage and that understanding there. Okay, moving on. Finances and enrollment. I get this question quite frequently as well. And this is one that you guys will like the answer to. For Section 2, number 4, the Chancellor's Office provides this very interesting number to the VSC in the months after October. We get this number from the team that puts together our system-wide financial statements. So they already have with them the audited data of expenditures to both the university and the foundation. And I'm able to provide that to the VSC team on behalf of everybody. So essentially what you'll do when you're going through this section of the VSC, you'll leave number 4 blank and you'll put a note in the note field that's just under it, saying that the Chancellor's Office will provide this information. And that's it. It'll be taken care of for you. So with that, that addressed kind of all the pre-submitted questions that were shared with me in terms of the VSC, but I'll pause right here to see if there are any other additional questions that might have been prompted by some of the slides I had. Alrighty. So question in the chat that with 2022, we would be able to count alumni membership fees. And then folks are wondering if that will impact the counting towards the number of alumni donor count. Well, it would, yes, because what if say there was an alumni whose only contribution was the gift portion of their alumni association fees, starting with 2022, that would then become a donor to be added to the donor count because of the shift in guidance there. And another question in terms of working with Lucian to help prepare some kind of canned reports for the VSC. They're on my list of vendors to work with to set up a user group similar to the ones we have with Blackbaud. So and then looking for volunteers to help kind of identify some topics or serve kind of as practitioner experts. So if anybody's interested in the Ellucian, serving on the Ellucian kind of steering committee for that user group, yeah, please let me know.
Sam, if I could just share, CASE is in the process of updating their VSE survey tool for 2022 using the new standards. As soon as they have their new survey tool in place, then they'll work with their educational partners, Blackbaud, raise, the different CRMs to help align the reporting that would then feed into the VSE. So your CRMs are probably not just ready to do that, but I would say in the next couple of months, they'll probably be suggesting any additional fields you should be tracking or helping to develop the reports into the VSE.
Mm-hmm. And this is always something we can discuss amongst our advancement services directors as well. From experience, I fill out the VSC survey for the Chancellor's office, and it's a pretty complicated report. It takes a lot of customization, and from conversations with colleagues, that's kind of the case across the board in the CSU. So there's a lot to be gained in us having a bit of idea sharing on this topic, maybe later in the fall. So the Advancement Academy will be happy to host those conversations. And of course, we'll bring our CRM vendor partners to the table as well and get their cooperation. So we'll work through it all together. It's a group effort. One more additional question in the chat clarifying the kind of 5-year parameter for pledges. So again, it's not meant to dictate strategy. It's not saying that your gift officer should not be booking pledges over 5 years. It's just saying that they only want to hear about them, or VSC and the CSU, frankly, only wants to hear about them in 5-year increments. So it could be a 10-year pledge. So you'll book kind of up to 5 years in the year that it was first established. And then after those 5 years, you'll book the next 5 years in terms of the pledge amount. Pledge payments will be reported on a gifts received basis as they're received. So that's going to be kind of in the other bucket. And again, so you just want to kind of keep that 5-year window of reporting for pledges, for instance, on section 1 of the VSC and for the particular field on the summary sheet as well. All right. And I'll pause here for just 2 more seconds to see if anybody else is typing up a question. All right, no, just a thank you for the last one. Okay. All right here. So moving on to our friend, the philanthropic productivity summary sheet, PPSS. And this is a homegrown tool that the CSU developed to capture, again, some of those funds committed that are not so well documented on the VSC. This summary sheet paired with the VSC gives us essentially a robust amount of data points for us to be able to prepare a lot of the reports and understanding that we need. The summary sheet kind of I'll give you the scoop, is the way that I collect the data for the appendix tables that we have at the end of the donor support. There's one per campus. I run a VLOOKUP on them, and then we compile those in the various appendices tables that we have in that report. The Excel form has 4 sections. The section 1 is really just kind of a high-level summary of your VSE totals that are broken up by the source and then again by purpose. Section 2, we ask you to take those VSE totals and break them up by pledge payments and new gifts. And then we take the new gifts and we add in pledges, we add in pledges and gifts from Native American entities that we can't count on the VSE. We add in revocable deferred gifts at face value, and then that gives us the CSU gift commitment number that we like to use. And then section 3 has a couple of data points on alumni participation that you can again reference your VSC on. And then section 4 asks for a couple details on your campaign if your campus is in the middle of campaign. And that's, again, we appreciate your information to be reported on that if you're in any phase of campaign, whether you're in silent or in public. We appreciate you guys putting those details there as well. Let's see here. And the important thing to highlight with these gift committed numbers is that they're really snapshots. So just like how you take a photo and you have the photo and then the world keeps moving around after that, it's perfectly fine for the values to change of these commitments. That's part of it. Some of them are revocable, and that's just in their nature. They'll change by the time from what they were reported on 1 year up to the CSU to what gets end up being received by the institution. Some come in at more or less, and that's perfectly fine. We'll keep track of those as, again, gifts received in the year in which they're received by the institution. And unlike, again, like campuses, we don't keep a running total of those changes. That's for your bookkeeping, which is important. But at the CSU level, we just take the snapshot every year, and then we just wait for the results to come in at on the gifts received, gift receipts method. And now we can go ahead and get a quick tour of our friend, the productivity summary sheet. So like I mentioned, top section, we really want to see the sources of the funds. And then again, the same number, and then you'll see these asterisks here because that references that should tie out. Again, should be the same numbers, but based on where they're being designated to by donors. The form is throughout kind of annotated to reference particular fields on the VSE, so you don't have to do double the work. You just put together the VSE that has its own very complex checks on the information that you don't have to pull on this sheet. And then again, here's the section where we ask you to break it out by new gifts versus pledge payments. And then we take the new gift amount, and then we add in Native American, new pledges, revocable deferred gifts at face value, and that gives us our favorite number here in the CSU gift commitment numbers. We also ask campuses to report the dollar amount of pledges written off. And then we also ask for a couple details on your endowment, your true endowments. These are endowments that are held for forever, your quasi endowments, and your term endowments that have some stipulations as to how they could be spent, whether time or by governing boards. And CASE does a good job of defining those in the standards, and that's the definitions that we use, again, them being global reporting definitions. And then we also ask for your teams to report the endowment distribution. And this is importantly just the amount pulled from the endowment that is used for the supportive programs on your campus, not administrative fees, not kind of special distributions, but that go to fund research, that go to fund scholarship, that get put to work. Because one of the points of pride that we have at the end of reporting is that we can show off this number to say, we spent X million dollars in support of CSU programs from our endowment. And then we'll get some familiar alumni participation numbers, again, that you can reference your VSC. And then just a few data points on your campaign that get used later on a compilation that's shared with campuses, and also in our philanthropic productivity dashboards. There's a little widget that summarizes campaign information for each campus that has a campaign. All right. And with that, wanted to see if there were any questions specific to the summary sheet. Awesome. I see Beth, you have a hand.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. I have a quick question on the summary sheet about the campaign portion. We kind of tentatively started the quiet phase of a campaign, and I indicated the start date was, I'm going to blank on it now, I think July 1st, 2019. And then we spoke with campaign council and had got kind of not a less than stellar fundraising year last year. So we opted to move the start date of the quiet phase up. And is that going to be an issue when I do the summary sheet this year, or?
Not really. So just before I kind of publish the information there on the dashboards, I circulate those to campus again and make sure that there's any edits. And it's quite frequent, and it's totally up to your discretion to move the end dates of your campaign, or to move the goals. We've seen that for a lot of good reasons recently, where the goals get moved north because we're doing such a stellar job of fundraising. So that changes there are perfectly fine. The only thing I ask is that you communicate those to me, kind of as you know them, or when I check in with them with you guys regularly in kind of the reporting season. Yeah, so perfectly fine.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Sam.
And if you know we're in that pre-campaign stage where we're not quite sure on some of these data points, then it might be best to hold off on reporting that campaign until the following fiscal year, where some of those details are a little bit more firm. Campaigns are, you know, inevitably a really broad consultation with a lot of constituents. So if it's perfectly fine to not report those in that pre-planning phase. So yeah.
Okay,
And then,
great. Thank you.
sure. And then I have a question in the chat here that I'm going to read through. So in the instances where we get a gift in kind, and then that gift in kind in turn generates revenue, that would be, yes, definitely more appropriate for your Nakubo survey, in terms of the breakdown that survey does on the various assets that you have. The VS at that point, that's more like a just like that's because the gift was the in-kind item. Kind of what you do with it is more your administration. Am I missing the mark on this one here, Lori?
Can you read me the question?
Sure thing. So we have, quote, we have an investment property and receive funds from charters and leases. In the VSC, we reported the gift in kind, which was a vestibule, a real estate. But the income generated by the gift, would that revenue be captured on the Nakubo instead of the VSC?
Yeah, so once you've reported it, once you reported the acceptance of the real estate, that's when it was a gift. Once you start receiving income from that gift, that is an investment. So it's reported in the increase of value in the appreciation of your investments on the Nakubo survey, but it is not included as any additional gift to the university. Just as if an investment reduced in value, you wouldn't reduce that from your giving totals.
Again, getting at that kind of snapshot principle of, you know, this is what came in, the values and other things are going to change, and that's going to, again, that's going to happen, and that's fine, but we're interested in that snapshot of it. All right, and I'll pause here again for another 2 seconds to see if we have any questions on our friend, the summary sheet. All right, so moving on to the other fun topic of our advancement expenditure reporting. So like I mentioned, our methodology for this predates the Section 2B of the VSC, and is frankly, again, more robust, more detailed, and it got started sometime in the mid-2000s, when the CSU started to collect expenditures on advancement divisions to prepare a cost-benefit analysis, comparing what we spent on advancement and fundraising to what was received and fundraised for that particular year. Again, we like to use the gift commitments number to capture the funds received, funds gained. And following a short study by case that looked at some of these metrics and methodologies for capturing advancement expenditures, the CSU kind of took those to heart and developed its own. And again, it was all before kind of the Section 2B of the VSC. And my guidance really to campuses on that is, you can hold off on not completing Section 2B because your teams will be providing a much more detailed report on our own again, kind of custom made website that we use to collect the advancement expenditures. And a high level overview of how we go about that is that we capture expenditures in 4 functional areas: fundraising, alumni relations, constituent relations, which is strategic and marketing communications, and administration, which is kind of a catch-all for miscellaneous activities that happen probably like at the vice president's office, and kind of central administration of the division that ultimately supports the 3 areas above. And I'll underscore that the way the functional areas describe ultimately the end purpose of an expense. So whether that's a position, it's kind of their ultimate purpose, and not the activities that they engage in day to day. So development officer will be a fundraising position fully, really, unless they're on some kind of very officially double duty, whether like director of annual giving and advancement services. That's a formal bifurcation. But otherwise, you're looking at a lot of expenditures and a lot of staff positions falling in only one of these areas. And again, it's pretty rare to have people bridging these areas, but on occasion there are a few. And in those cases, I ask that you kind of reach out to me and we can talk through how to appropriately allocate them to the different areas. One important part of a lot of advancement divisions that kind of doesn't get their own section is advancement services. We see that as a very central and important unit, as you guys all probably feel the same way. And we ask campuses to report that broken out depending on how much they support a particular area. So they might spend 20% kind of updating alumni records for alumni relations, 30% of it kind of pulling prospect reports for development, and et cetera, et cetera. So we break it out that way. There's also some other guidance on particular positions that we've kind of put in one bucket or the other. Frankly, a little arbitrary, but when we're dealing with 23 very different campuses, we had to make some calls there. And of course, this is one of those reportings where it's best to give Sam a phone call, and you can talk through kind of where to put somebody or how to allocate an expense, and things like that. The other very high level thing that I'll want to underscore is that with this methodology, we were looking really closely to match the direct expenses to fundraising outcomes. So that means that we excluded a lot of rather pricey things that happen in advancement divisions that are not directly related to fundraising outcomes. One of them being commencement. That is an incredibly expensive series of events that doesn't really have too much philanthropic outcomes, so we exclude those from reporting altogether. Also, special events team or central campus events teams that hold conferences and provide those types of services to campuses. Again, because those services and those expenses are not directly tied to fundraising. If there is maybe a person or a half of a person that's assigned to fundraising events amongst that team, then we will include that person in as a fraction of their overall salaries for the year. And again, that's another really good example of calling Sam to talk through how much to appropriate that person for the reporting. The other item that we exclude from this reporting are governmental relations. And that's mainly because we don't report public funds on our philanthropic totals. The one exception is tribal relations, because we'd count the gifts from Native American and sovereign entities in our gift commitments. And there are, I think, 2 campuses that have a Department of Tribal Relations in their university advancement, so we count those folks. And then there is several pages in our guidance document for this reporting that goes into the many overhead expenses that we don't count as well. Things like office space, which is brings a chuckle nowadays, or like phone services or internet, things like that, that, you know, may have a charge back to your division, but frankly are just something that you need overhead to provide the services overall, and it just didn't feel fair to connect those to philanthropic output. And again, that's the kind of reasoning methodology between why we exclude some things, to make sure that we're getting a really fair comparison when we do the cost benefit from expenditures to philanthropic gains in a particular year. These reports, so the data, again, from the gift commitments that get submitted through the summary sheet and the expenditure reports that get submitted through our customized website get kind of put together in these neat reports that we call philanthropic productivity dashboards that are part of a bigger report. But this kind of is our, again, a dashboard, a summary of a 3-year running total or 3-year running average of productivity for a particular campus. My apologies to Bakersfield for putting them on here, but you guys are first in alpha order, so you guys are going to get picked on. And you can see that on these reports, we keep a 3-year running total of gift commitments compared to some goals that get provided by the campus. And also we track advancement expenditures. Again, 3 years against some kind of forecasts of what we think a division's gonna spend for that year. And then we bifurcate the expenditures by fundraising and everything else, because we only use the subsection of them that are to fundraising activities when we calculate the return on investment numbers that you see off to the right. And those ROI numbers are essentially calculated as the 3-year sum of just the fundraising expenditures divided by the 3-year sum of the gift commitments for that campus. And then it's the same formula for a particular campus's peer group and then for the system overall. And then that way you get a sense of kind of how you break in across those averages as well. I'll share that overall, the CSU sees an excellent ROI in terms of its philanthropic productivity. In fact, and we see kind of, multiple dollars back in fundraising gains for every dollar that gets spent in fundraising. And in fact, last year, a consulting firm working with our Bakersfield campus here did a kind of historical analysis for as far back as we have data in terms of gift commitments and fundraising expenditures. And they found that overall, historically, for every $3, we get back a little over $3 for every $1 that we spend towards fundraising. So we're running really effective shops, and these reports help kind of communicate the heavy return on investment that we get from our hard work here. And then all of these reports, so of course these dashboards and copies of our annual report on donor support are housed in our report section of the CSU Advancement intranet, and they're available there for folks to pull and research and reference throughout the year. In June and January is when we wrap up our report on donor support, and it gets posted on there. And you'll probably see an email from me go out to a couple listservs announcing that report is ready to view. The report also has a spiffy website on our calstate.edu domain where you're able to explore the donor stories that get submitted with it. And in March is when we wrap up our reporting for campus plans. That includes the dashboard and some additional deliverables as well. And those get posted on here, and they're free use for anybody to compare. Vice presidents usually discuss them in quite depth at their March meeting as well, when they discuss strategic planning and items like that. So ultimately, all these reports are resources for the CSU. They help give us kind of a common set of definitions and benchmarks that we can have comparative conversations on and begin to explore some of these deeper topics with one another. And with that really gets at the content that I had for us here today. So I'll leave it open to see if there are any questions on any of the above, advancement expenditure reporting, or maybe a lingering question from case reporting standards or the VSC from earlier. So with that, feel free to jump off mute or drop your question in the chat. Did it put everybody to sleep? All right. Oh, Laura, please go ahead. Oh, you're on mute. Hold on.
Sorry for the mess. My background is not set up. As you're seeing the office at home I'm working in. So I just wanted to clarify that with the changes of the global standards to not to only be able to count plan giving expectancies at age 65 starting this year. So on your philanthropic predictor report next year, those are the only ones we'll be counting, correct?
Exactly
Even
correct.
though at our campaign, which is entering its 5th year, we will be counting those that are below that. We can count whatever our campaign standards were, which were age 50 and above. So we'll have 2 numbers that we kind of hold throughout the year.
Correct.
Right? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Just wanted to clarify and make sure that was right.
Yeah, we're essentially asking you guys to walk and chew gum on this one. You'll be keeping kind of a running total for your campaign based on the guidelines that were set by that committee, and then you'll be keeping kind of a total based on VSC and CSU. We try to make it easy for you guys. We try to match the CSU as close as we can to the VSC to kind of eliminate some of those variables. But ultimately, it will depend a lot on who's asking you. If the chancellor's office asks you for your totals, you might want to take a close look and make sure that it's by case standards. If it's your campaign chair or your vice president asking you, you want to clarify whether they want the campaign or they want case totals. And again, you're just going to have to keep both of those going at the same time.
Not a problem. That's the plan. Thanks. Thanks for this webinar. It was really informative.
For sure. And I'm happy to send out the link to the reports page on the advancement intranet. I got a question about that right now.
Perfect.
And the full details, and I say full details because every year we send out a good 20-page document that outlines all of the guidelines and how to count things and considerations for both expenditures and gains. Those are forthcoming in the coming days as well. We wanted to make sure that we had this opportunity to kind of brief everybody, take your questions, and every year I look those over and I kind of revisit some of the phrasing and make sure that they make sense and it gets at some of the more recent questions that I got as well. And the chat is popping up a little bit, so I want to make sure I am addressing all the questions here. For sure. So we're looking for your VSC and your summary sheet. We're looking at October 9th for the due date. The VSC is due October 1 to case. So we'd figure we'd give you guys another week to kind of route it for signature and make sure that you get your cover page together. And before you send that off to me. Also would be smart to maybe ask for an extension on your VSC just to maybe a couple days in case in the process of it being reviewed by executive leadership, you have an edit that you then have to go back and update a figure on. CASE is very appreciative of people being diligent and of providing updates. I've also gotten the question occasionally too, we have an update to a previous year survey. Can we update it? Yes, you definitely can. You can email vsc@case.org, let them know that you have an update to a previous year number. Depending on how big of an update it is, they might open up a previous year of the survey and let you kind of update it as needed, and then you can let them know and they'll close it back down. And then that data gets pretty occasionally refreshed to the case data miner tool as well. So yeah, we always welcome edits. We always welcome corrections to previous years whenever you find them. Let's see here, and I'm making sure I can address.
Sam, there's a question about where the recording will be kept.
Yes, so I'll email everybody here that registered. It's going to get posted on the Academy YouTube, and I'll drop a link to it probably on the reports page that I have here up on the slide as well. So you can rewatch it and make sure that in case you missed anything. And then we have a follow-up question to the 65 limit, and I'll clarify that that's only for revocable gifts as case defines them. So the irrevocable gifts are again going to be your charitable gift annuities, your remainder trusts that as outlined in section 3C. Everything else you want to make sure that you only report starting next year. You want to report that it's only from donors who are 65 and older as of June 30th, 2022. Let's see. And the expenditure reporting, we usually have due kind of mid-January. We push that back a little bit later because we like to give campuses a chance to wrap up their audits that usually happen in the fall. And that way they can submit confident, clear expenditure numbers to us. And then you'll be getting emails from me in early February asking you to review the information you've submitted via the UADB and make sure that those expenditures are accurate. Awesome. Yeah, and thank you all for logging on today. I appreciate your participation and your help on all of this reporting. At the very least, I can do after giving you the task of helping us out with this is being available to answer your questions, which I am. I'm always an email or a phone call away in case you get into the deep of it and you have a rather particular question or anything that you can't remember from today's webinar. Definitely there to help out. Yeah, so let us know. And yeah, appreciate everybody dropping the thankful and the thanks in the chat there. All right, so I'll hang out here for just a few more minutes since we wrapped up a little bit early to make sure that I address anybody's questions that might be maybe a little bit shy to ask to the full group. I'm here to help address this as well. But if you have your questions answered and you've gotten what you needed out of today's webinar, you're of course welcome to log off. And I wish you a very good rest of the day and a good rest of the week. And thank you in advance for your help on this year's data reporting. Sure. So I got a question on the additional deliverables, being the stories for the donor support and the NACUBO survey. The stories for the donor support are probably going to be due mid-September, and the guidance applies from last year. We would like a minimum of 2 really strong, interesting stories of support to your campus in the last fiscal year. And when I mean strong and interesting is is it something that we can communicate the impact of already? They don't necessarily have to be the biggest dollar amount value, but something that, a donor left a very strong quote about why they chose to support the university, something that has quite an extensive impact to the success of the university. That'll all be great fodder for the narrative writing that we do for the support. The report on donor support. The NACUBO is always a little bit tricky when it comes to due dates because the NACUBO runs their own survey and they don't really tell anybody how they're going to run the survey until they run the survey. But generally that instrument opens up in September. And then we ask, and it's usually due kind of in the 2nd or 3rd week of November, but we usually have campuses kind of wrap it up in the 1st week of November. So that gives us, well, it gives my office plenty of time to review that information and confirm it and get our deliverables in place for January to get those donor supports printed and published and all that good stuff. So September is when the NACUBO will open and it'll be due early November. So you won't want to delay. Last year, the NACUBO sent out kind of a draft, a Word version of the survey to everybody so they can get started before they opened up the online version. As soon as you get that draft or maybe advanced notice version of the survey, go ahead and start on it as well. It is always a beast of a survey. And I sympathize with you guys right there because I have to do the one for the CSU Foundation as well.
Thank you, Sam. I appreciate those additional details.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you for this. This webinar is very informative.
Oh, yeah, sure thing. So a few campuses probably got the those gifts from the Mackenzie Scott. My suggestion to that one, if you're looking to submit one of those stories, is maybe make it one of the 2 that you're submitting, only because we might combine those into kind of like a super vignette on the report to explain the various campuses that got those gifts in the last year. Again, so and the 2 story is a minimum. You're welcome to submit 3 or 4 of your really strong stories, and that just gives the editorial team putting the report together more to choose from. But be prepared for any one of the 4 to end up in the report. And then I usually work with my colleague in public affairs too when we put out the call for these stories to your campus PIOs. And that's going to happen in the next couple of weeks as well. So they have it on their radar also. And those are the folks that see this type of information, these types of stories go out very regularly. So they're at the ready to send it. I often have them send it to me directly, and that's perfectly fine too. Yeah, so yeah,
I
Laura.
had a question. You mentioned the case campaign survey, like the daily survey. I've never submitted my campaign numbers to anybody except to you. So are other people submitting to other places? I don't know how you do it. Are you supposed to do it? I don't.
Supposed to do it? No.
Okay.
If you're interested in participating, sure. That's up to you guys.
Are other CSUs doing it? I mean, I've just never even
I
really.
haven't, and to be honest too, I haven't even cracked it open recently either to see.
Okay. I mean, we went to the case guidelines, the old guidelines, to draft up our counting campaign standards based on how they want us to count it. So we went there for resources and how we're going to count it and guidelines, but we never thought about reporting anywhere else. So I just want to make sure I'm not supposed to and I haven't or something.
Supposed to, no. There's no requirement on that. And again, and that's to the point that these campaigns are really in support of the university, and sometimes the priorities on your campus will match the kind of the parameters that case sets for that survey, and sometimes they won't. Both are perfectly fine, because ultimately these are for to support your campus. But yeah, if you're in a situation where there's some overlap and you want to submit the survey and maybe make yourself eligible for some of the case campaign awards, then yeah, that's definitely an additional point that you can submit as well. Yeah, CASE has a lot of surveys. There's a new one last year too on institutionally related foundations. That you, again, we're not necessarily asking campuses to complete or requiring them to complete, but if you're interested in seeing what others are reporting on those data points, you're welcome to do so. And the exciting thing about the CASE global standards, again, is that pretty soon all these surveys are going to start talking the same language. So we'll be able to have some really powerful kind of cross-survey analysis possible soon. Yeah, and once that kind of fleshes itself out a little bit more, and you want to do provide additional information on other surveys, or you see some opportunities there, you're welcome to do so. For the time being, we really, at the system-wide office, we just really ask campuses to submit the VSE and the NACUBO. Those are the two really big surveys that we find the most use as a system.
Perfect. That's what we'll do. Thank you.
For sure.